Today I'll be doing Kansas. So first I'll talk a little bit about the head coach, and then I'll talk some about the roster, and then I'll go through their schedule game by game and give you a predicted winner and loser for each game. So head coach at Lance Leopold enters his fourth season as the head coach at Kansas and his 18th season as a college head coach. He was the head coach at two other places before Kansas. One place was a Division III school, and then another place was a Group of Five school. And I think he's a really good coach. Before he got to Kansas, Kansas wasn't just the worst football program in the Big 12 conference that finished last in the conference every season, but they were also the worst football program in the Power Five. And he's turned them around into a above average football program now. So his first year at Kansas wasn't really any better than they had been. They were only 2-10 that year, but in his second year, he got them to a bowl game, 6 wins, and almost won that bowl game, losing to Arkansas in overtime. And then last season, which was his third season, he got them to a 9-4 season with a big win over Oklahoma. And his recruiting has really improved at Kansas. So his first full recruiting class in 2022 ranked 117th in the country. And then in 2023, it improved to 73rd in the country. And then this year, 2024, Kansas had the 43rd ranked recruiting class in the country. So they're still not recruiting great, but much better than they had been. And I think it's going to be hard after this season for Kansas to keep him because I think better programs are going to try to hire him away. I think he's probably the fourth best coach in the Big 12 conference right now. I'd only rank Gundy at Oklahoma State and Whittingham at Utah and Kleeman at Kansas State ahead of him. Uh, his overall record as a head coach is 163 and 60. Uh, so now, starting on the offensive side of the roster, Kansas's offense is going to be very good. I think this year they're going to create a lot of explosive plays, and they're going to be a very balanced offense. So starting at quarterback, Jalen Daniels comes back, who is a very good quarterback, one of the conference's best quarterbacks. And the problem though is in his 2 seasons as the starting quarterback at Kansas, he hasn't been able to stay healthy. He only played 3 games last year because of a injury, and then the year before that he missed 4 games because of a different injury. But if he can stay healthy this season, I think he'll probably play in the NFL. So in 12 games in these past 2 seasons, he has a 2,719 passing yards and 23 touchdown passes. And he's only thrown 5 interceptions, and he's accurate. He's completed 68.2% of his passes and has a good average yards per throw at 8.9. And he's also a good runner too. He has in that also a 493 rushing on 104 carries and 7 rushing touchdowns, averaging 4.7 a carry. And his best game was in a bowl game in 2022 against Arkansas, where he threw for 544 and 5 touchdowns. So they're in good shape at quarterback. But the problem is, if he does get hurt, Kansas probably won't have the kind of season that they're hoping to have because the quarterback that took over for him last year when he got hurt, that did a good job for them, is gone now. So Kansas's success is going to depend a lot on the health of Jalen Daniels. So at wide receiver, the starters look good. They've got back Lawrence Arnold, who has in 2 years combined 1,498 yards and 88 catches and 10 touchdowns, averaging 17 yards a catch. And they've got Luke Grimm, who has in 24 games these past 2 seasons combined 85 catches and 1,178 yards and 12 touchdowns, averaging 13.9 a catch. And they've got Quentin Skinner, who had last season in 11 games at 587 on 29 catches and 2 touchdowns, averaging a really impressive 20.2 yards a catch. And at running back, Kansas is really good here. They return Devin Neal, who is one of the best running backs in the country. He's a 3 year starter at running back for Kansas, and he's no doubt going to play in the NFL. He had last season on 203 carries at 1,280 yards and 16 touchdowns, averaging 6.3 a carry, and had 6 games of over 100 rushing yards. And they've also got Daniel Highshaw, who's a very good number 2 running back, who had last season 626 on 121 carries and 8 touchdowns, averaging 5.2 a carry. Now, the offensive line is, I think, going to be the concern on Kansas's offense. So they only have 2 starters coming back on the offensive line. Now they did add in a transfer guard from Iowa State who is good. His name is Daryl Simmons. He started 38 college games and played 2,567 snaps in college, and in all of that has only allowed 1 sack and 40 total pressures. So on the defensive side, uh, Kansas's front seven does not look good, but their secondary does look really good. So on the defensive line, they bring in 2 transfers from FCS teams, and they do have 2 starters coming back. But one of them is a pretty good player, Jareem Robinson, who had last season 4.5 sacks and 25 tackles and 11 total pressures and 6 pass breakups. And then at linebacker, not very good overall. They do return 1 starter that is a pretty good player, JB Brown, who had in 12 games last season 57 tackles and 2 sacks and 2 forced fumbles and a fumble recovery and 2 pass breakups and 3 total pressures. So in the secondary, Kansas is going to be one of the best in the conference this year. So both starting corners return. Kobe Bryant, who had last season 32 tackles and 5 pass breakups and 4 interceptions and a sack and a forced fumble and fumble recovery. And Mello Dotson, who is a 2 year starter at cornerback, who has in those 2 years combined 102 tackles and 17 pass breakups and 6 interceptions, and 2 of those went for touchdowns. And then both starting safeties return who are really good. They've got Marvin Grant, who's a 3 year starter at safety and has in those 3 seasons combined 180 tackles and 5 pass breakups and 3 forced fumbles. And they've got OJ Burrows, who's a 2 year starter at safety, who has in those 2 years combined 99 tackles and 7 pass breakups and 3 interceptions. And special teams, their kicker leaves, so that's kind of questionable. And their punter returns, but didn't do a very good job for them last year. So special teams could be kind of concerning. But overall, this should be a pretty good team. So now, moving on to the predictions, they start the year against some team called Lindenwood, which will be an easy win. So then they play on the road at Illinois. This could be pretty close. Illinois, I don't think is going to be very good, but I don't think they're going to be horrible like Colorado or Vanderbilt. So Illinois does have a pretty good receiving unit. I've looked at their roster, but Kansas has a big advantage with their running back unit, and their quarterback is better than Illinois' Luke Altmaier. And Illinois probably does have a little better offensive line than Kansas, and cornerback is pretty similar, but Kansas has an advantage at safety. And probably on the defensive line. And then Illinois probably has a little bit of an advantage at linebacker, but Kansas has the advantage at coaching. And I still think that they'll get this win even on the road. So then they play UNLV. UNLV isn't a horrible group of five team. This one may not be a blowout, but I do think Kansas will win it by a couple of touchdowns at least. So then West Virginia on the road. This is a bad matchup for Kansas's defense because their strength is stopping the pass, and West Virginia is going to be a running team, a very good running team. I don't think Kansas can really slow down their run game in this game. And West Virginia is better at the line of scrimmage. And I do think that Kansas will score quite a bit in this game too, and it'll be close. But I'm going with West Virginia. So then they play TCU at home. So this is a bad matchup, I think, for TCU's offense because they're going to be a passing team, and I don't think they're going to be very good at running the football. And Kansas's strength, is stopping the pass. So I think the Kansas defensive backs will slow down those at TCU wide receivers. And Kansas, I do think will score a lot of points in this game, even though I do think TCU may have a pretty good defense this year. TCU's play at the line of scrimmage isn't going to be great either. So I'm going with Kansas, but I do think this one will be pretty close. So then Arizona State on the road, a horrible team. Their team is full of weaknesses. Now, Kansas, I don't really think is going to be good enough to blow them out, but I think they'll beat them by a couple of touchdowns. So then they play at Houston at home after getting a week off. Kansas's offense, I think, is going to be way too much for Houston. I don't think Houston can slow them down really in this game, and I don't think Houston has much of a chance of being able to keep up with Kansas in this game. It, I think Kansas will win by a couple of scores. So then they play on the road at Kansas State. This is a bad matchup, like the West Virginia game for Kansas. Because Kansas State, like West Virginia, is a great rushing team. I don't think Kansas can slow their run game down. I think Kansas State will score a lot of points, and Kansas State has better play at the line of scrimmage than Kansas. And Kansas State's whole defense is very solid. I think Kansas will score quite a bit, but I think Kansas State can slow them down a little bit, and I think it'll be pretty close. But I'm going with Kansas State. So then they play Iowa State at home after getting a week off. So Iowa State, I looked at their roster. They've got a pretty good quarterback returning, and they've got maybe even a better wide receiver unit than Kansas does. And I think they've got a better offensive line and a better defensive line than Kansas. Now Kansas has a much better running back unit, uh, and Iowa State's linebackers I like better than Kansas's, and Iowa State is going to have a pretty good secondary too. And I think this game will be really close, but I think Iowa State will control the line of scrimmage, and that'll make the difference. And even on the road, I think Iowa State gets this win. So then they play on the road at BYU, a terrible team, not very many good players. I think Kansas will win this one pretty easily. So then they play Colorado. This is going to be a blowout win for Kansas. Uh, Colorado, they can't run the football at all. They can't take advantage of a weak front seven of Kansas. Colorado's offensive line is going to be even worse than Kansas's defensive line. Colorado's line of scrimmage play is probably the worst in the Power Four, and Colorado's passing game is going to be good with Shador Sanders and some good receivers, but Kansas's secondary can slow that down some, I think. And Colorado's defense is going to have no hope of slowing down Kansas's offense. Kansas may not have a great offensive line, but Colorado's defensive line could not take advantage of that. Kansas, I think, may score 50 something in this game. And then they end the season on the road at Baylor. Baylor, I don't think is going to be very good. They may score some in this game, like 20 something points, but I don't really think they can slow down Kansas's offense. And this one, I think, probably will be somewhat competitive, but I'm going with Kansas. So, my final prediction for Kansas is 9-3 overall and 6-3 in the conference. So this would put them out of the college football playoff and Big 12 championship, but I think Kansas is a contender to get there. They could go 10-2. I wouldn't be surprised because the games that I picked them to lose are all games they could win. But also, uh, there are other games on here that they could possibly lose, like TCU, that I picked them to win. So I think probably at worst case they go 8-4, which is what they were last year. But that'll be it with this video, and please subscribe and thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.